Oh yeah, welcome to CHM 4.0 Church History Master Class. It's been a very long ride and quite a long short silence between the last edition and this one. In this edition, we want to look at the church in the Middle Ages. You remember that the last one we finished covered the time of the Roman Church, and we actually went into the Middle Ages because we talked about the things that happened around the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages or the medieval period, is usually between the 590 AD to 1517 AD. At least that's what we are going to cover in this course. This period was when especially 590 AD, point blank, I have in the last edition I have overlapped into the Middle Ages, fine. But now we are like taking a step backward and then going further and then to see specific issues within that time. So we are starting with the story of a man called Gregory the Great, Gregory. Gregory the Great. We're going to look at his story, his role, his leadership in the church, and that is going to give us uh, an overview or insight into the happenings within the church during his time. By now you are familiar with the Western Rome, Eastern Rome, Eastern Rome in Constantinople, Western Rome in the city of Rome. You're also familiar with the patriarchs. You're familiar with the emperor of the West, emperor of the East. During this period, especially in 590 AD, during that time, the Roman Empire has fallen. The different Germanic tribes, like I explained in the last lecture, has conquered Roman Empire. They have taken some part away and established their kingdom there. The Franks have taken over where they call Gaul, Gaul, which is today's France, which used to be the territory of the Roman Empire before that time. So there was no emperor in Western Rome, but there was an emperor in Eastern Rome. So the emperor in the Eastern Empire now controls both the West and the East. So he appointed a representative to be in Rome. Rome is a city in the country of Italy of today. Now, some parts of Italy has already fallen, or they were falling gradually, but the main city of Rome itself have not been really conquered by any king, so to speak. So the emperor would send somebody there to represent, or will appoint somebody to represent his interest in that place, and that was the situation of that time. So you have the you have the Franks, the Franks tribe established their own kingdom, and you know that the Western Church have members and churches in different places that have now been conquered. And so whoever is the Bishop of Rome or the Pope in Rome must be able to deal with those that conquer those territories where they now have those that conquer those territories that but as Roman Catholic churches. He has to be able to deal with them very well so that they can allow the church to still be independent and the Pope to have an oversight over his church. So the Pope also has to cooperate with the Eastern Emperor, who have an oversight over the city of Rome. And also there were many political issues, like from history, the imperial soldiers of the Roman Empire in Rome also have their own personal interest. Those who used to be the royal houses in Rome also have their personal interest. And so the Pope is also there as a figure of leadership that people will look up to. So this puts the Pope in a very in a position where he has to navigate, uh, pay allegiance, and maintain relationship. It also gives the Pope a lot of power because there is no emperor to look up to in the West. It is the Pope that serve as a figure that can be looked up to. So this Gregory we're going to look at actually became a bishop. But before he became a bishop, he had a story. He was involved in monastery, in the service of the emperor as well. And this is everything we're going to look at and the issues that unveiled during his time. So this man is called by a different name, Gregory the Great. He was called the Great because of the kind of leadership he presented, especially in time of crisis. His reign was clouded with crisis for Rome. Rome was going through a plague at his time. This plague killed about 250 to 700 million people in the entire Europe. In fact, his role at that time made a lot of impact on Christianity, not just in Rome, but in the whole of Europe, and also like savage Rome during war and savaged the whole continent. His role and the role of the subsequent leaders of the church. So when they say the continent of when they say Europe owns a lot to Christianity, you know that Christianity actually helped it to maintain its balance in different ways, especially in this period of crisis. So this plague even killed the predecessor of Gregory, and he was able to help the church, help the people a lot during that time. So these were many things he did, providing leadership, helping the poor, especially he helped the poor a lot. They called him Gregory the Great. He was also called God's consul. God's consul, a consul is like an advisor in the Roman kingdom, a very high ranking officer that advises the king, guides the king. So at a time when Gregory assumed the leadership of the church, he was seen as somebody who provided leadership and direction for the church in a very dire situation on behalf of God, like an advisor of God. That was the meaning of the name, like an advisor of God, or like a leader for the church on behalf of God. It was also called God's consul. It was also named as one of the Latin church fathers. We're talking about the Latin church fathers. You're talking about people like Augustine, St. Augustine, you're talking about Ambrose, you're talking about Jerome. If you want to expand it, we're talking about Tertullian and so many figures like Cyprian of Carthage. Okay, I mentioned Augustine of Hippo. These are people referred to as Latin church fathers. They were called Latin church fathers because they shaped the theology of the church. They established the theology, shaped the theology of the church. They are like founding fathers. Even though this man we're talking about today did not really play a major intellectual role in formation of theology, but he provided leadership in a very dire time. He also see to the establishment of the existing theology and doctrine, the acceptable theology and doctrine of the church, which is called orthodoxy. He like cemented it, made it popular, and made it follow through because of his leadership ability. In fact, he did a lot of reforms in such that it decentralized the leadership of the church in the Western Rome, allow bishops and priests to have roles that allow for the coordination and consolidation of the power of the church. He also talked about the money, the financial responsibility of the priest in the church. He sought to it and ensure it is well taken care of. He was the one that he sent delegates of missionaries to conquer places. He was one that sent out the first archbishop of Canterbury to England We're talking about Augustine, Benedictine Augustine. He sent him out together with some 40 people. They Christianized England, and that was how Christianity moved from England to America. So you can see the kind of role that he played in that way. And when you're talking about somebody that cared for the poor, he really cared for the poor. We're going to be looking at it one by one. So it was referred as one of the Latin church fathers. The certification or qualification to be called a founding fathers is like you establish theology, you have some intellectual works and all of that, orthodoxy, establishing formulation of rules and all of that. But in his case, it was like a maintaining officer or consolidatory officer, and then combined with other apostolic work that he did in the expansion of Christianity, granted him a place among the Latin church fathers. So this man was born into a wealthy old senatorial family. His father, his mother, they were nobles in Rome. They have always been a noble for a long time. So he was trained specifically so that he can assume leadership role in public offices, can be appointed into a political role. That was the main reason why it was, no, sorry, that was how it was trained, so that it would be able to carry that out. And indeed, at a point in his life, it was appointed as a mayor of Rome, or what they called prefect, or what they call urban prefectus or something like that. It was appointed this duty, which was the highest duty, apart from being an emperor, that a person could hold in Rome at that time. It was in charge of the welfare of the poor, the supplies of food, and the distribution of food to the poor, to the needy, to those, to the dependents in the society. He was also in charge of building of infrastructure, building of sewage systems, bedrooms, and those things that were major infrastructures at that time. In fact, it was in charge of Rome. But he did that role for 2 years. When his father died, his father gave him some properties. So he's from a wealthy family. When his father died, he had properties. With his property and his wealth, he established 6 monasteries. You know what monasteries? I've talked about that. His own family house, family estate that was given to him, he converted it to a monastery as well. The rest of the money, he spent it on the poor. In fact, throughout his lifetime, he established orphanages, hospitals, things that could care for the poor. So that was how he lived his life. That was when his father died. I told you about him taking the office, the highest office in Rome. He did that for 2 years. He stepped down from that office. It was like he saw corruptions of public office holders and some other factors. It was withdrawn and he became a monk. He went into the lifestyle of a monk. It was eating raw food and vegetables. It was fasting, praying all night. He went overboard after told you about monks, how they behave. So much that it started affecting his health, which would actually impact his health for almost the rest of his life. It was, somebody that was a royal officer wearing purple clothes, known with Roman officer. He put off the clothes and he was wearing ordinary clothes as a monk. So when it was a monk, I think it was a monk for 30 years when Pope Pelagius II. Now, don't be carried away with the use of the word Pope. Pope then was not a title. Pope, I've explained, Pope was another word for Papa or Father. The common title there was Bishop of Rome. So, but if I call it Pope, understand that it has the moment Pope become a recognized title for Bishop of Rome, even those that were in charge before then were also referred to as Pope. So in 579 AD, Pope Pelagius called him from his monks, called him from his monastery and made him one of the seven deacons of the Church of Rome. Then sent him to Constantinople as an ambassador, probably an ambassador of the church to the emperor, to the Eastern emperor. And then he did that work for like 6 years. So, I told you that he was trained for that. He was trained as an administrative officer. He was trained to represent the king, to hold public office. So it was something he did successfully. So after 6 years, he came back to Rome and was appointed an abbot, A-double-B-O-T, which is the title given to the person in charge of an hermit or a monastery. When he returned and became an abbot, the Pope died. The Pope was infected by the plague I mentioned earlier. There was a plague, it was called the bubonic plague. It killed like 250 to 700 million people. Sorry, 70 to 200 million people, as it was estimated around the whole of Europe at that time. It has to do with respiratory issue, I think inflammation, swelling, and all of that. And that was what killed the Pope. So it was appointed to be, for 6 months, there was no Pope until it was appointed to become a Pope. And then he ran away. They went to pick him up. He ran to a monastery. They picked him up. He became a Pope. They called the Bishop of Rome the successor of Peter. After he became a Pope, the first thing was to deal with, because I told you that the Pope was like the political figure, not just the religious figure, political figure for the city of Rome, and a political and spiritual figure for everybody, not just in Rome, but in other territories of the Western Empire where you have a Catholic Church. When I say Catholic Church, I hope you know what I mean very well. I'm talking about the Western Church, and they all looked up to him. So he led a procession, like 7 people, walking around the streets of the land with the icon of Virgin Mary, praying on the streets that God would take away the plague. The first day, the second day, the third day. The third day, they got to a place, and Gregory said he saw the vision of Archangel Michael, and that is a legend. A legend means a story that can't be confirmed as true. They said that he said he saw the vision of Archangel Michael putting his sword back into his sheath. You remember when David sinned and there was plague in the land? David went to make a sacrifice and he saw an angel and the plague stopped. So that was the picture the legend is meant to achieve in your mind. That he saw the angel put his sword back in his sheath, which means an end, of course, anger, and also mean that the plague was going to stop. The plague didn't stop immediately, but after some time it did stop. And prayer was not the only thing that he did. He implemented what do they call it now? The quarantines, separating people that are sick. He implemented sanitations and some other hygiene and health things that could be done in the situation of a plague. But the plague also stopped. So people till today, like according to the legend, they attach the stop of the plague to him. They attach the stoppage of the plague to him because of the spiritual role he played, also because of the leadership role, yes, but particularly because of the spiritual role that he played. And indeed, when the plague stopped, an angel was built at a particular place. That place is called Saint Angelo from the word angel. Up to that is what they call the place when they built that angel there. So that legend, that story says it was that place that he saw the angel. I told you it is not a confirmed story, but indeed, up to now, you will see the statue of an angel, Archangel Michael, standing there, which signify the end of the plague. When the plague stopped, that was when they erected that figure. But people now bring story around that angel, which we don't know whether it is around that statue, which we don't know whether it is true or not. Okay, that was how the plague stopped. So just as the plague stopped, those they call the Lombard, they came and they want to conquer Rome. They have conquered some part of Italy. They built a siege around Rome. A country that had been facing war just survived a plague, and then some army now came in. An army now came in to besiege the city. So he saw his position as a pope as a punishment. And after those guys tried to gain entry for some time, they couldn't gain entry, but they remained. Remaining there means nobody will go out, nobody will come in, and eventually hunger and plague may break out that will force them to open the door for people to even die in the city. In that case, there is no political figure per se that could stand up to the situation except the Pope. He stood up to it, negotiated with them, and it was said, should I use allegedly, they paid a ransom, but it was said that they paid 500 pounds of gold. 500 pounds of gold. Again, it's not like a fact, but that is what they say around that figure, that he paid to those soldiers for them to retreat, and he got that gold from, I believe, and history also says, from the temple. Maybe gifts that people has given to the temple, to the church over time. That was where it was taken from. So during the plague, they also distributed food and supplies to those that are in need and all of that. So that kind of leadership that he demonstrated often strengthened his power, even though a difficult time, but strengthened his power as a force to be reckoned with. So even when the Lombard, Lombard, they established their kingdom around a place in Italy, not in Rome, but in Italy, they were able to relate freely with the Pope, and the Pope was able to relate with them. So while it's like you being in Oyo State, and then Ibadan belongs to an Eastern emperor living far away, and your neighbor or your town is taken over by another kingdom entirely. So you need to relate with that your neighbor kingdom, as well as pay allegiance to your boss abroad. So that was the situation the Pope was, and he was able to manage it very well. Another thing that showed the power of the church and the power of the Pope at that time was that they owned a land which was about 1,800 square meter. I tried to see how large that land is. That land contains about 1.1 million acres of land. I just want to bring it to the language you can understand. And 1 acre has a 6 plot of land. And I checked the size of Ibadan. Ibadan is around 788,000 acres, which is the largest city in Africa. So even that land was larger than Ibadan. Even though during Gregory time, the land was not even up to that yet. It was still around 640, 940,000 acres, which was still a lot. And how did they get this land? Through gift. Kings, people, nobles, they gave them land. And then people were living in this land, but it belonged to the church. And so the church has the power to tax them. So the church has now become a government in the land because people pay them taxes and they also see to the welfare, especially under Gregory, to the welfare of people, distribution of materials, especially the poor within that area of land. That land is so wide, but over time, politicians in Italy, when government was changing, they were taking part of it, taking part of it, taking part of it, till I think they have just like 1,001 acre, 1,100 acres left, which is called the Vatican to today. So that's the that's the power the church had and that Gregory had. So he was a very powerful man. Despite the power, despite the love he had among the people, somebody that sold everything he had to build orphanage home, to give to the poor, to distribute wealth to the poor, would really be loved by the people. Despite being loved by the people, despite the kind of power he has and the recognition he has, both at the side of the Eastern Emperor and everywhere, he rejected being called big titles. And that was why I said the word Pope was not even a thing in his time. He rather accepted to be called servant of servants. That was the title he gave himself. When the patriarch, you know what the patriarch is by now, when the patriarch of Constantinople, or the bishop of Constantinople, the pope, the bishop of Rome, was also a patriarch. The bishop of Constantinople was also a patriarch. So when the patriarch of Constantinople began to refer to himself, he wrote a letter. His name is John 4. He wrote a letter to Gregory and he was referring to himself as ecumenical bishop or ecumenical patriarch, which means universal patriarch, which means universal bishop. That is, he claimed himself to be the head of all other patriarchs and bishops. Gregory really fought him and said no, he must never assume authority over the rest of the bishop. And while some people believe that it was from the fact that this man himself did not use any title, is an humble man, it is also from the viewpoint that he still wants to maintain the supremacy or the primacy of the Roman bishop, of the Rome bishop, of Bishop of Rome, over all other bishops. And I believe the patriarch of Eastern Rome at that time believed that since the Western Rome has fallen, there's no more emperor there. He now has the authority over every other person. And Gregory is saying, no, if you don't have that kind of authority. In fact, Gregory said, is anybody that uses that title is a Satan, because it's only Satan that is universal over the whole earth. So, but some believe that was because of his humility. Some believe that it was a political statement. But in short, he himself did not use any title. But even at that, he exerted great authority. He understood power and he used his power very well. He caused changes, reforms, and all of that in a very assertive manner, and he was that respected. Meanwhile, I told you about how he fasted, pray all night while he was in the monastery for 3 years. It actually affected his health. Most of the time, he would be on the sick bed. He wouldn't be able to move, even though yet he was still working very hard. And let's look at some of the things he did. He sent missionaries to England. I think it's not just England that he sent missionaries to, but England became prominent because of what England ended up becoming. It was one that sent the first Archbishop of Canterbury, Benedictine Augustine, Benedictine. Then Augustine, Augustine. It was the one that started Christianity in England, won the whole England, and caused Christianity to also be extended to the Americas. Another thing you can say about him, I said he was listed among the church fathers, and the Latin church fathers to be precise, and that was because he promotes some beliefs and a mixture orthodoxy, that is universal belief, harmonious belief and doctrine, is established among the Western churches. And some of the beliefs that he really promoted among others is: number one, he talked about the doctrine of man. What is the doctrine of man? He said when man gave his life to Christ, the work of salvation was purely a work of grace, and then the man gave his life unto Christ. But after receiving salvation, man needs to live in that grace of God and also put his will on the line to cooperate with God to be able to continue in his redemption. He also believed, I talked about icons and veneration of icons the other time. He also believed and even promoted that we can pray to martyrs and saints for the forgiveness of our sins. That we can pray to them to to help us beg God, to help us seek forgiveness. Now, this is the way the Catholic treated sin. They see that if you have given your life to Christ, you should not sin again. If you sin, you can ask the saint to use their own righteousness to take away or to cleanse a part of your own unrighteousness. And so you can invoke them. You can invoke their name, like say Saint Augustine. You acknowledge their holiness, like recognize that they are servants of God and they were holy. Then offer prayer to them. Let me give you an example. Saint Sebastian, Matthias, and servant of God, I ask for your intercession. Pray to God for me that I may be forgiven of my sins and granted whatever request that you want. That's funny to me as a Pentecostal, and it's not biblical. I can say that with the whole of my mouth. And it was not like that in the beginning. It was a practice that came up afterwards. If you remember when I started talking about the martyrs and the teaching, that they believe that they have a higher place of holiness than us, and that since they have abundance of holiness, they can now use that holiness for the forgiveness of our own sin. That was where it came from. So he also promoted and believed that relics of these saints, let's say their clothes, icons, their hair locks, their toes, maybe their bones, any parts or icons of these saints contains power. While let me say, understand having icons around in worship and services of Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, as ascribing power, let's say mantle, it can be a mantle, but ascribing so much power to relics and the images of these icons or of these saints, so to speak, is also not biblical. It's foreign to the doctrine of the scripture. Anyway, this is history class, so that was what he taught, believed, promoted, and is still in practice up to date in the churches that I mentioned. He believed that they have so much power that they can even defend you against harm and against issues. So there's something they also call penance. Penance is when you commit a sin after salvation, you go to confess your sin to a priest. You acknowledge your sin, you recognize your sin, you confess your sin. Then it doesn't end there. You now go and do like almsgiving or service or fasting or even community labor just for the forgiveness of your sin. You must go through a stage of like a suffering or self-inflicted punishment for the forgiveness of your sin. That is another practice I believe still in practice in Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches till date, which Gregory really promoted and believed in. There's another thing they call purgatory. Purgatory is said to be a place the soul of a man will go to before he is accepted in heaven. So what Gregory teaches that, and what the Catholic I think generally believe, is that when a person dies, some people are clean. Maybe when they commit some sins on heart, they were able to do penance, they were able to ask the saints to forgive them their sins and all of that, and and then when they die like that, they are immediately promoted to heaven. And some people, their sin is so weighty that immediately they die, they are sent to hell. But there are some people, they are like intermediate. They are not very sinful and they are not very holy. So purgatory will be a place where their souls will be purged and cleansed. And in that place, they will go through suffering, or maybe a longing, or maybe a little test of fire, for them to now be admitted to heaven. I think Muslim has a belief around this a little. I don't know too much about them anyway. Around this thing as well, but the Catholic believe it. Gregory really promoted it. And then, so those in the purgatory, those who are alive, can continue to make prayers for them, can continue to pray for them for their cleansing, which can hasten up. You know, the Muslim will say they are doing Sarah for the dead or something. But this one, yeah, you can do services, give to the poor and all of that, or do some religious rites because of them. In fact, Gregory and the Roman Catholic believe that you can serve Holy Communion because of them. You serve Holy Communion. He believed that Holy Communion can also work for the forgiveness of the sin. They don't believe that when you sin and then you ask God to forgive you, just get forgiven like that. No. Because since you've given your life to Christ, all your past sins were wiped off, but you were not allowed to sin again. So when you now sin, that's to be some kind of punishment or duty you have to do that can wipe away your sin. So when they serve communion, they believe when they serve you the communion, it is to remove your sin. One of the purposes of the communion for those that participate in the communion especially. And in this case, it can also be offered on behalf of the dead. Now, there's an example that Gregory wrote in his book. There was a monk. The monk was called Justus. Justus, some money was found on him, which they believe he stole. And because of that, he killed himself. He went and drowned himself in the river. When he did that, the church believed that he was a sinner, every sinner, and so they are not going to do the right kind of burial for him that can even hasten his road to heaven if at all is qualified for heaven. But the Pope said no, that they must do the right thing by him, because the sin, the money they saw with him, or the sin they said he committed, is not fully proven. So if they do the right thing for him, he will make heaven. If he actually did not commit that sin. But if he did commit that sin, if you do anything for him, nothing will happen. So it's better they don't forget about him and do the right thing for him, so that he can receive mercy and get to heaven. If I thought he have sinned, maybe God will just see it as a very light stain on his soul. So they did some stuff for him, the burial, and then the Pope on its own declared that they will be serving communion every day on his behalf. So on the 30th day of serving the communion, a man saw, the brother of this guy said he had a dream or maybe a vision, and he saw Justus and said he was suffering, he was in the purgatory, but because of what they did on behalf of him, the intercession they made for him, he was saved. He's now on his way to heaven or something. So this guy went to tell everybody, maybe he went to tell the Pope or everybody that this is what he saw. But they said this guy did not know that they were serving communion on behalf of his brother. That's the story. I don't know whether it's true or not, but that's the story. That's what Pope Gregory wrote in his book. So let me see other things that can help us to understand so things I said so far have helped us to understand the religion, the church history, and the political setup of that period. Let me see if there are other things about him that I missed. The bubonic plague is spelled Bubonic. The space of land that was occupied by the church those times was called Patrimony of Peter. He didn't just establish quarantine center during the plague. He implements quarantine and sanitation measures. They build hospitals and manage the hospitals. They have care facilities. They organize and distribute food and supplies. uh I've told you about all this part. I think I've covered everything. Thank you so much. 40 minutes. Wow. See you in the next course, in the next lecture, I mean.